Alright, guys. What we're going to do today is start talking about the war in Vietnam in the context of what the overall American strategy is. We left off, hopefully you've watched that documentary and get a sense just how controversial the war is, the lack of good command and control, the fact that it's not popular and that's in 1967 where this lecture is, about going to end off. It's not popular. What I want to do is talk about, what our strategy is, and if you look at the subtitle, A Civilian Nightmare. And I say that because the real losers in the war in Vietnam are not the United States, but it's the Vietnamese populace. Now, understand, I'm not really a fan of giving trigger warnings. I think history should be taught unadulterated. It is what it is. There's no point sugarcoating it. But I am going to warn you, this is going to be, might be a bit rough to listen to. Because we have this image in our heads of the United States, we're the good guys. Right? We're the guys that, we fight for freedom and democracy. Hopefully you kind of even get that vibe. You watched A Nation Builds Under Fire. John Wayne, linking it back to the American Revolution. Fighting for liberty. Fighting against tyranny. But the fact is, wanting to do the war on the cheap. Wanting to not have to commit large numbers of American soldiers meant that the United States has to find ways in order to make up the difference. I mean, war, von Clausewitz said, war is the resolution of politics by other means. Okay, it's this idea that if two nations go to war, the idea is there has to be a victor and a vanquished. Somebody has to win, somebody has to lose. And if you fight a limited war, okay, both sides have to fight a limited war, but the North Vietnamese are not fighting a limited war. So if we want to limit our numbers, want to limit how many troops we send, then we have to do so, we have to find ways to make up the shortfall. And I'm just gonna be blunt. The first time I taught this course, I was mid giving this particular lecture, and I had a non-trad student who said, Dr. Prince, you make us sound like assholes in Vietnam. The fact is, if that is not the opinion you come away with, okay, then I have not done my job. I love the United States, okay? I'm, middle right Republican, I'm conservative, but the fact is, Vietnam was a giant misstep. And I won't necessarily say it's a misstep that we, fought in Vietnam. Although in the event, what was the point? But it's a misstep because of how we conducted ourselves. One of the things we're going to see is if you look, when the United States historically fights a war in Asia, our old racist attitudes come out. 19-2, we're fighting in the Philippines. If you look back at soldiers' letters, they're very, very racist. They don't like fighting against brown-skinned people. And oh my lord, all of the just, racist epithets that come out. It's insane. We see it in World War II. Those of you that have had either a survey course or a World War II course from me can well attest to this. But look at the propaganda difference between the Germans and the Japanese. Okay, now some might have been done because of Pearl Harbor, but there's also just that clear racist difference. Yes, the Nazis are bad. Yes, the Nazis are evil. But they're white people. Whereas the Japanese are Asian. And so, consider this. Food for random question, food for thought. Would we have been willing to drop an atomic bomb on Frankfurt or Hamburg as we were Hiroshima and Nagasaki? We can see it again in the Korean conflict. Not as much, but still there. And we definitely see it here in Vietnam. And I think it's that racist attitude that allows, just the type of war to be fought in the sense of we don't mind destroying entire villages. We don't mind the fact that war atrocities. And, don't kid yourself. There are many atrocities in Vietnam. We won't get to it this time, but probably next. Or, by the end of the week, we'll talk about My Lai. And My Lai was probably the worst documented American war crime of the Vietnam War. Something like 500 civilians raped and then murdered by an American infantry platoon of the American Division. But the fact is, an Army report found that My Lai-style massacres were becoming a common thing in Vietnam. We worked closely with the South Koreans in Vietnam. They were just as racist, and in fact, the worst war atrocities of the war, that's why they're called war atrocities, were perpetrated by the South Koreans, not the North Vietnamese, not us, but the South Koreans. Now, why I mention that is because the thing to keep in mind is when you ask, and I'm sure you will, why do we lose the Vietnam War? Okay, we as a society, we acknowledge we lose it, but we don't like to talk about it. We lose the war because the civilian population cracks. Because it's almost the extent of that total war. Make war on the civilian population and they'll give in. The problem is, it's the population we're helping. We inadvertently make them crack. And part of it's the failure of this guy, General William Westmoreland, the guy standing right here next to LBJ. He is the American military commander in Vietnam. And he doesn't really have a cohesive policy. How do I win the war? What are my war aims? What are my objectives? He doesn't have a good policy. We have this idea, okay, hearts and minds, as I said, okay, we're going to, make you think like the capitalists. We're going to make you think the capitalists will protect you. But we're working against that with Strategic Hamlet. Yes, by 66 it'll be replaced, but the damage is done. Our military policy using air power, right? Well, consider this. If we're fighting guys in South Vietnam, we're bombing South Vietnam. Okay? If they're hiding amongst the civilian population in South Vietnam, we're bombing South Vietnamese citizens. We're not bombing to the same extent the North. We're not bombing the North Vietnamese army in the North. Ground policy, there's this idea of, okay, well, search and destroy. Destroy the VC. Gain the initiative. But there's not a sense of, okay, how do we do that effectively in a way that does not alienate the civilian populace? We just don't have it. Instead, we rely on a policy of attrition. What is attrition? Simple. If we kill 100 of you and you kill 50 of us, all right, then, if we each have 200 guys, eventually you'll get tired of the war. We'll kill more of you, you get tired of the war. And to do this, we revolve around the idea of search and destroy. We don't fight large pitched battles. There's no front line, as you would imagine World War I, World War II. Instead, it's a case of, okay, we're going to fly into this village, we're going to fight a small battle, we're going to do a body count, and then we're going to leave. And then in a couple of weeks, we'll fly into another village and do the same thing. And it's just this idea, just these small little battles, and hopefully the body count adds up. Now, part of why I said this, we have to, Westmoreland's idea is a three-phase strategy. First, gain the initiative, okay? Stop the various attacks. Stop the VC and their, terrorist attacks and their attacks all across South Vietnam. Then you need to clear out the bases. Clear out those strongholds within the country. Not North Vietnam, but in South Vietnam, where they can use as staging areas. Then eventually turn it over to the Army of the Republic of Vietnam, let them defend their own country, and then the United States can withdraw. The plan was, and I apologize, I would love to make jokes, and I've got a couple, but when I'm really trying to impress on you, just the sheer numbers, it's hard to do this. It's hard to make jokes. I can't wait till we get to the 60s and we can talk about hippies, because then I can bring out my Scooby-Doo jokes. Why? Because we're going to talk about recreational drug use. And look at Scooby-Doo, okay? Shaggy, he's clearly a hippie, his clothes don't fit, and his dog talks. And the color of the mystery van. And he eats dog food. Tell me the dude is not high. Tell me he's not tripping on LSD. I'm just saying. Things I wish I'd caught as a kid. The problem with this three-phase strategy is, as we talked about, the ARV and the Army of the Republic of Vietnam, it's ineffective. It's just, that nepotism, the fact that, the officers are imbeciles, it just doesn't work. Then there's also the issue, okay, gain the initiative. as we're doing this, the North Vietnamese are constantly pouring men and equipment in. We're not hitting the bases in North Vietnam. At no point are we even talking about an invasion of North Vietnam. Think the Korean War. When we go into North Korea and it eventually triggers the Chinese coming in. There's no discussion of that here. Here it's clearly we're going to fight only in South Vietnam. So what we do, we resort to the search and destroy. We resort to, okay, you go into these villages, you search for signs of VC, you search for, weapons, things like that. You destroy them. If need be, you destroy the village, and then you evac. To make this possible, we start using a lot air mobile infantry. Okay? This thing of, helicopters are now standard issue, they're no longer toys. We have enough, you can now airlift in even regular rifle infantry divisions and just airlift them in. You don't have to march through a jungle, you don't have to have a long thing. You can just deploy from Saigon or Da Nang or wherever and move out to whatever base you need, drop them in, and then they can go on patrol. But the issue now becomes, again, because there's no front line, there's no way to track progress of the war. If we look at, a map of engagements, okay, just major actions of the war. One, notice the proportion of South Vietnam to North Vietnam. If you look at North Vietnam, it's air raids. But if you look, okay, there's no front line. So you can have Tet Offensive 68 at Da Nang. Behind it, you've got Pleiku in 65. But then behind that, you've got stuff going on in the 70s. And in front of that, you've got stuff in 67. Okay, the whole country is a war zone. There is no front line. So there's no real way. Okay, there's no real way to track progress of the war. So why do you need to search and destroy? Okay, well, simple. It's because the Viet Cong, South Vietnamese communists, they wear the traditional, and we'll talk about them in a second, they wear the traditional black garb of the peasant. Okay? It's a case of, look at me, look at me, I have a weapon. All right, I'm VC. Put that weapon away, grab my farming implement. I look like a civilian. You don't know which I am unless I reveal myself. So what that means is you have to go in, you have to search these villages. You can't take ground, there's no front line. You search these villages, and what you have to do is, you pretty much they have to, again, rely on the body count. These sharp firefights, and you can't say, well, we took the village of Pleiku. Because, okay, you fly in, you do your stuff at Pleiku, you leave, well, they can come back. So instead you say, okay, at this action, Pleiku, we killed 150 VC, we lost 15, 20 Americans, clearly we won the battle. And this, again, sets that, the tone is set from Ia Drang in 65 of we have a lot of artillery support, we now have fire bases all over the country in such a way we can reach out and hit, these various places we're doing our search and destroy with artillery. Eventually, these temporary things become veritable forts. I mean, this almost goes 16th century fort. But the question is how effective, because we're fighting the war on the cheap. We don't have a front line. We're not just stationing troops. Okay, boom, here's now regular stuff. No VC here. Now we're going to move up 100 miles. Now there's no VC, in our back line. Just all the way up to the border. We'll have guys go to this village today. Then they'll go to this village tomorrow. This village now. And then in 2 weeks, they've got to go back to that first village and check because we're afraid the communists might have come back in. Now, part of why they have to do this is because they want support for the war. If you launch a major war, it's not going to be, why do people have to, fight and die half a nation or half a world, away? Not to be cliche, but the old joke, have Americans give your average American a map and have them point out Iraq on the map. They can't find it. Well, that's not, that dissimilar from the 1960s. Where the hell is Vietnam? Where is French Indochina? I assume it's by China. Now let's hope I can find China. So what we see it's done on the cheap to try to keep up support. We see that, okay, those Cold War fears, the domino effect, communism, get people to try to support the war. You're going to have John Wayne, Jack Webb, all these people making all sorts of infomercials. You're going to have huge rallies like this. Back LBJ in Vietnam. The Postal Clerks Auxiliary. Okay, I'm not sure why, but whatever. Or here. Love, support U.S. soldiers in Vietnam. On the more extreme, look up in this corner by the rotunda. The Holy War Against Communism. And here's something else. If you hear people today, okay, well, well, ISIS has a holy war. That's bad. This idea of holy war, crusades, this has long been a military concept. Dwight D. Eisenhower called fighting Nazi Germany the Great Crusade. Okay? Here, people are saying it's a holy war against communism. We just don't like holy wars and crusades if they're against us. If we declare one against somebody else, that's totally fine. But it's this idea that even in 1965, people were so scared of communism, they had no problem backing this thing. So you get a plethora of short films. You get all of the stuff pro-war, demonstration parades. Yeah, you have your teach-ins, you have your demonstrations, but not until 1967 do you start to really get a lot of anti-war feeling. And the reason you do is because the war drags on and on and on and on. One thing to remember, okay, in addition to the Vietnamese civilian populace cracking, our populace just decides they don't like the war. And if you want to know why, the reason is, when does it end? If I God, I can talk today. If I showed you a map of the European theater of operations in World War II, and I said, okay, here's the front line in June of 44, here it is in July, here it is in August, here it is in December, you can track the process of the war. And you can say, okay, we're getting closer to Germany. We know if we conquer Germany, kill Adolf Hitler, the war is over. So you can watch progress and feel confident that the war is going to end. You don't have that in Vietnam. Look at this map. You have no way to know. Okay, well, we're fighting in the Central Highlands, 65 to 71. Then we're going to go fight at Quang Tri in 72 up by the DMZ. But then we're fighting in Saigon in 75. But then we're doing... there's no way to track the progress of the war. So by 67, people are just tired of it. Not to mention, this hearts and minds attitude just does not work. Hearts and minds is a failed policy. Now, Johnson wants that because his whole hope is if the civilians get on board, they won't turn VC. Again, to create a Victor Charlie, Viet Cong, all you have to do is sufficiently tick off a civilian so they grab a Soviet Type 45 SKS or a Chinese Type 56 SKS. And then, grab some ammo, grab a couple of grenades, boom, they go into the field. That's all you have to do. These people would often use children. A friend of mine told me a story of his uncle who, they were out on patrol. Okay, well, actually, no, it's not patrol. They were at a base, and here comes a child, comes up to him, and then like, hey, you're not supposed to be here. You're not supposed to be here. Well, it's a kid. What do you do? So the kid comes up, pulls out a grenade, pulls a pin, throws it in a Jeep, blows up his best friend. So, next time kids come up, no, don't cross that line. Well, they cross the line. You have no choice but to shoot them. The guy said, yeah, I had to shoot 14 kids on my tour, but the thing is, only one of them did not blow up after he shot him. This is a total war by any stretch of the imagination for the Vietnamese. We might try to limit it from our side here in the United States or back in the world, as American soldiers would have said. But in country, it is a total war. Hearts and Minds also doesn't work because as you have civilian casualties from the bombing, from, just these excesses, war crimes, whatever you want to call them, from the fact that, American troops just get antsy, and I'll talk about that in a second, civilian casualties mount. The strategic hamlets disrupt peasant life. So what we see is that the very thing you're trying to accomplish, the way you're going about it simply does not work. And so the policy is doomed to failure. If you look at American Soldier, there's also the issue, and we'll talk about this, the idea of being too short. An American Soldier did a tour in Vietnam, a tour of duty. And the fact is, when you went into Vietnam, you knew when you would leave. You could count it down. So the problem is, imagine as you get closer to that, what are you going to do to be willing to go home? You're a World War II soldier. Sorry, you signed up for the duration. You don't go home till Nazi Germany surrenders, and even then, there's a 75% chance you're shipping out to the Pacific. You don't have that in Vietnam. So the performance of American soldiers is different. The weapons are different. We're using, and I wish I taught this lecture in class, because we could have a spontaneous discussion, and I'll do it for next time. But we're using now the M16. This is the first major war of the M16 rifle. And it's such a space-age rifle, and I air quote that because that's how they marketed it, that the rumor went through it was so advanced you didn't know how to clean it. Okay, that's a problem. And, it's just, this is an army in transition. This is an army that, to reach this new generation of soldier, they can't put out training manuals. Here's how to field strip, rifle caliber, blah, blah. No, instead they have to do it comic book form with, very beautiful, voluptuous women telling them, yes, take that part off. No, stop. That's not your job. We literally, the first time I ever taught this course, impromptu discussion, because, and that's one thing I love online classes. But the one thing I miss about doing it in class is, idea just pops in my head, we can go do it. Here, lecture, it's pretty much, okay, here's video, subject, whatever. But we had this huge discussion that actually turned into the whole women's rights, portrayal of women, comic books, things like that. But understand, this is not the army that fought in World War II. These are not the same type of people that fought in World War II. But at the same time, the populace expects something similar, because you've got those same names like John Wayne from World War II selling the war. One, it's jungle fighting. Historically, the United States Army sucks at jungle fighting. Why? Because we're trained in 1965 to fight, in the Fulda Gap of Germany. We're trained for combined arms tactics. Infantry, mechanized infantry, supporting tanks, undercover of artillery and air support. Vietnam, until the late 60s, the Army doesn't even bring its tanks. So the one thing that we have trained to do since 1942, we cannot do. The United States has not fought an infantry-only war since the First World War. We suck at fighting insurgencies. We can go back to the Philippine-American War and see that. Anytime we fight insurgencies, war crimes skyrocket. It sucks. And again, I love this nation, but I'm going to be critical here because, my hope, what is the purpose of the historian? I tell you where we went wrong in Vietnam, then if one of you becomes president or whatever, faces a similar situation, you think back to that, crazy fat guy that you had as a history prof that told you something, you're like, aha, I don't want to do it the same way. So yeah, I'm going to be a little critical. The Vietnamese use all sorts of stuff, landmines, booby traps, explosives. Some of the favorites, dig a hole, get punji sticks, plant them in the ground, then cover the top with poop, human excrement. Why? You fall into that, it stabs you in the gut, you have feces inside of you, boom, sepsis. You are dead. There's nothing you can do. Booby traps, literally booby trap anything. Put a grenade under it, pull the pin, set something on that. Guy goes, oh, what's this? Boom, right in his face. One thing they would do, especially around the Da Nang area, where they had to fight Marines, because Marines brought their tanks. What they would do is get trees on the opposite side of the road, tie razor wire about the height of a neck of a tank commander outside of his M48 Patton, or main battle tank. Tank rolled by like 20 miles an hour, razor wire just decapitates him. Literally, you don't even see it until the tank commander's head rolls down the side of the tank. Okay, this is, a pretty grisly thing. Where do they get the explosives? Simple. We're dropping so many tons of bombs. Something like 7 million tons of bombs dropped on Vietnam. A huge portion of that's a portion. I don't even know what that is. Apparently I'm Irish and didn't get the Brexit memo. I don't know. But a portion of that does not even explode. So you go recover the bomb, rip off the casing. We just dropped a 1,000-pound general purpose bomb. Great. There's like 500 pounds of explosive there you can use. Sometimes booby trap them, whatever. Dig the bomb, make a mine. Dig a hole, put the bomb in there. It's a grisly war. But then, and here's where I was mentioning the American soldier. Look at it from the American soldier's perspective. Okay? An American infantryman in World War II. Okay? Yes, you might be in for the duration, but overall, you're not going to see that much combat. Okay? I think a guy that lands at D-Day. Okay, so June 6, 44 to the surrender of Nazi Germany, May 7, 45. You might see, and I forget the exact number, but I want to say it's something like 120 days of combat or something like that. Maybe even 100. It was something like, 1/3 of your time deployed was only spent in combat. Whereas here in Vietnam, you're in combat most of the time. You're in action most of the time. And now part of that, okay, you're drinking beer in Saigon. I had, and I was actually sad to learn that he just died. But years and years and years ago, when I was in high school, I went to Tulsa Technical Institute because I wanted to do computer programming. And I realized that I would kill myself if I got a job where I worked in a cubicle all day, so I became a historian where I worked in a cubicle all day before I got my own office. Anyways, and the instructor had been in the 1st Air Cav in Vietnam. And, he told us about, how gritty and bad the war was. And he said, but, every other weekend, I'm in Saigon drinking beer. But the issue is, you don't know if Saigon's going to be hit. It's the capital of South Vietnam. It should be behind the lines, but there are no lines in Vietnam. If you're forward deployed to a village or whatnot, interacting with civilians, you might not be in a firefight, but you still have to be ready, because those civilians at any time, okay, she's just a nice civilian, whips out a grenade, pulls a pin, boom, you're dead. You don't know. So this takes a psychological toll. There's only so much of this a human being can stand. And I ran the numbers, and I forget the exact numbers, but your average grunt in Vietnam is not only about 5 years younger than a soldier in World War II. The average age for an American infantryman in World War II was 26. The average age in Vietnam was 19. Okay? So not only are you younger, but you can see as much as 24 times the amount of combat. 24 times. That is a huge psychological problem. If you want to know how the war crimes happen, this kind of grisly war, an enemy that is often unseen, and you're in combat so much, there you go. Now we try to sell the war. Again, John Wayne, this man, Walter Cronkite, is the face of American news. He will be important. We'll talk about him when we get to the Tet Offensive. But more important than trying to sell the war is the fact now you can watch the war. Okay? This is the living room war. And like I said, you can now, in World War II, the war would be placed in newsreels. So what that would be is today when you go to a movie, all right, which, by the way, I just went and saw Independence Day 2. I loved it, but I'm also a fan of the original. So, just throwing that out. But, okay, you go, you sit in the movie, you watch like about 3,000 hours of previews for movies that are entirely unrelated. Then you see the wonderful Coca-Cola ad where, the parents talking about, their first date, and somehow Coke's relevant to that. And then you get to the movie. Okay. In the 40s, you'd see a couple of trailers, you would see a newsreel, which would tell you about the world around you, you would see a short film, then you would see a cartoon, then you saw the movie. It was an experience. Well, now you can see it on TV. Now you can see it nearly live. Now you can see it, more importantly, unedited. That's why they call it the Living Room War. And we can see this in the August 1965 burning of Khamenei. I posted the video about burning of Khamenei. And it was done by CBS correspondent Maury Safer, who actually just died about a month and a half ago. And why this is so important is in 1965, they tried to do what they did in World War II. You have combat correspondents. If you've ever heard of a guy named Ernie Pyle, he was a reporter for Stars and Stripes in World War II, who was so well known to the American public for his articles that in 1945, they made a movie about him with Burgess Meredith called The Story of G.I. Joe. And what was ironic is this movie hit the theaters in 45 only like a month before the real Ernie Pyle was shot by a sniper, I believe on Iwo Jima. So it's this whole, you embed correspondence, you get pictures, film, all that. Well, they try it here. But now, with Vietnam, what is so important about Vietnam from a military history perspective is this is the war that the veneer of war is ripped away. What do I mean by that? Warfare had always been seen as something fun. It had been seen as something novel. Again, I mentioned men. This is how you went and proved your masculinity for the women. This is how you got a woman to want to sleep with you. As you're like, I have been to war. I am a man. All right. Warfare was also traditionally, from a civilian perspective, over there. We don't see it. We don't hear about it. We hear about the battles. We might see good pictures. Okay. Look at, a lot of World War II stuff. Very rarely would you see pictures of American dead, but they had no problem showing all the pictures of enemy dead. Now you can see it live. And for many, it just shreds what they think. The American populace had this image. Okay, and again, please watch Khamenei, because Maury Safer, the video I posted, it actually shows the original broadcast as well as Safer himself talking about it. Okay, which, what happens? We have this image in our heads of this. This is the American soldier. This is a guy, 1944, Belgium. Maybe even most likely Belgium, I think. Here's chocolate from my ration. Here, kids, I'll give you a chocolate bar. We're the good guys. We're here to liberate you. Don't be afraid of us. When you hear English being spoken, when you see an American, you thank him. We're here to help you. But then you turn on the burning of Khamenei, and you see an American soldier with a flamethrower. You coax people out of the thatch roof houses. You light it on fire. On live TV, American soldiers burn down villages. On live TV, you'll see things, and this isn't Khamenei, but it's, similar stuff. Interrogate civilians, including women. Put an M16 right to her head and get the photo. Or this from 1967, the Bo Din province. Burn down a village, capture one guy. And again, we see this happen live. And this also contributes to the eventual loss of support. When we have in our minds an idea of something, of how we want it to be, okay? We react negatively when we're exposed to reality. Okay, I just think, no personal thing. My wife has a lot of problem with her mother, and she has this idea of who and what her mother is, but every time she sees her mother, she realizes, oh, that's why I moved 150 miles away. I didn't want to be anywhere near you. That's okay. I love my mother-in-law, Another thing you should learn from Dr. Prince's class. If your mother-in-law hates you, never teach her how to shoot a gun. That safe to say that was one of the dumbest things I've ever done. But it's this, we have this image in our head. This is who we are. This is what American soldiers are. This is what we played up in World War II, our own propaganda. The citizen soldier. That the American GI is representative of the culture he comes from. What does it mean to be Americans? We help people. We give these kids in rubble, here's chocolate bars. We help you. But then 1965, this is the reality we have to come face to face with. Johnson is angry. Not at American soldiers, and he literally excoriates CBS because Khamenei, the airing of the burning of Khamenei is just a special report. Angered many Americans. How can we do this? How can we be the good guys? How can we win hearts and minds doing this? And so because that, we see a shift in the role of film. Traditionally, war movies are pro-war. Traditionally, they're there to sell the war, to get you jazzed up about being the noble hero. I'm just thinking what? Jazzed up things like the movie Fighting 69th from, I believe, 1941 or 42. You hate the hero, he redeems himself, and he jumps on a grenade and saves his buddies. Okay? That's what they're trying to do. Now, by 1930, you do start to get anti-war movies. Things like All Quiet on the Western Front, which was so anti-war that Nazi Germany banned it. We can't show this. But by and large, most war movies were pro-war. There's a story in 1949. MGM produced the war movie Battleground. And it was about the Battle of the Bulge. And for extras, they actually got veterans of the 101st Airborne to play themselves. And one of the three studio execs was like, no, Americans are tired of war, they won't want to see this, and tried to get the movie shut down. The movie was not only released, it became a smash hit, because even after the war, even after all those years of war, 4 years later, Americans still want to see American troops being the good guys, being victorious. Yeah, America. But Vietnam changes things. You get short films, but the only feature-length movie is The Green Berets. That's the only feature-length movie that's pro-war, really. After that, most Vietnam movies are going to be anti-war, they're going to play up war atrocities, and they're going to reflect societal opinion of the war in Vietnam. And just kind of a thing, this is why the movie review, okay, which if you want to do a second book review, that's fine, but movie review, because something like this could be fun. What do movies say about a culture? The fact that the majority of Vietnam movies are against the war. I myself can only think of 3 possibly pro or neutral movies. The only ones I can think of, okay, Green Berets, obviously, where it has literally the big spiel of, we've got to fight Vietnam to stop communism. Also, fun fact, it has Mr. Sulu, George Takei, plays an ARVN officer in the movie. There's Flight of the Intruder, which was probably the first post-war pro-Vietnam movie. It wasn't necessarily pro, but it felt more like a World War II movie in the sense of we're clearly the good guys, you like the hero, we don't see war atrocities. It's got the rousing music to make you feel, yeah, good, we're Americans, we're blowing the hell out of them. And it took a lot of flack for it. We Were Soldiers, about the Battle of the Ia Drang, because, it felt like a traditional World War II movie. Whereas more other movies really hit hard. The idiocy of a lot of generals, the lack of strategy, the war crimes, the rape, just all of the horrible stuff that went on in Vietnam. So why? Why do we lose Vietnam? Why is it such a bad thing? And now we can actually get into how it's fought. This is the Viet Cong. Victor Charlie's it's called. They look like peasants. The only difference is they have, obviously weapons and ammo pouches. They're not equipped to any sort of standard degree. The average weapons that the VC might use would literally be whatever they could get a hold of. Light machine guns were typically Russian DP-28s from World War II. They often used, World War II Mosin Nagant rifles, German World War II Mauser rifles that had been captured by the Soviet Union and passed on were common. Chinese-made Mauser rifles were common. I've heard tell of Japanese Arisakas from World War II. Soviet Type 45 and Chinese Type 56 SKSs were common. A few AKs, captured weapons. This guy right here even has an American M3A1 submachine gun from World War II. But the key difference, not key difference, but the key thing to remember about the Viet Cong is because they are irregular, all they have to do is put aside their weapons and they look like a peasant. For instance, take this woman here. She's carrying an American M16A1. God knows where she got it. But if she takes that and just puts it down, she's a civilian. How do you know the difference? Now, these guys on the right, these are regular army. These are North Vietnamese army. They're equipped by and large mostly with Soviet or with Chinese Type 58 AK-47 clones. They, some Type 56 SKSs. They have better light machine guns. They are wearing uniforms. They are uniformed combatants. The Viet Cong are not. So now, you want to know why war crime happens. Okay, imagine you're a 19-year-old person. Okay, you're a 19-year-old guy. You've been drafted. You don't even want to go to Vietnam. You're in Vietnam because you couldn't afford to go to OAMC. You couldn't afford to go to Oklahoma Agricultural and Mechanical College. You have 20 days left on your tour. If you survive 20 more days, you come home to the United States. You know when you get to leave. And then you see this woman. Now, she doesn't have that M16 in her hands, but you don't know. She acts even a little suspicious. What do? Do you say, well, I don't want to risk doing anything, so I'm going to wait till she makes the first move, which if she produces a pistol or an M16 or whatever, you have no time to react? Or do you already carrying your M16 set to full auto, she acts suspicious in the village, just open fire and say, it's her or me, and I go home in 20 days. I'm not saying I condone it. Far, far, far from it. But put yourself in that mindset. You have slugged it out for 9, 10, 11 months in Vietnam. You have dealt with women attacking and killing your best friend. You've dealt with kids throwing grenades at you. You've dealt with suicide bombers. Yeah, they employed suicide tactics. Just all of the stuff. And now in 10 days, you go home. And you see this woman act suspiciously. What do? I'm just saying, again, I'm not asking you to condone it. I'm not asking you to say, okay, he was justified. What I am asking is put yourself in that position and say, well, I wouldn't do it. But eventually 500,000 Americans will cycle through Vietnam and ask how many of that 500,000 would. They use booby traps. They use guerrilla tactics. Again, they're not as well armed, but they have the advantage of they can fire and then blend into the countryside. By 1966, in South Vietnam, you have 46,000 regulars, 114,000 Viet Cong, then 112,000 even less well-equipped guerrillas, and 160,000 militia. For the guerrillas and militia, consider those people that would be like, okay, well, I have to work my harvest, work in the rice fields these months, but when that's done, yeah, I'll pick up my gun and go fight. So part-time soldiers versus dedicated versus regular. And again, of all this, you know what the regulars, you know who they are. You don't know who these other people are. You don't know until one of them opens fire. Now, if we look at the peasantry, and again, it's the peasantry, they're the ones that I think crack first. It's because, in South Vietnam, in Vietnam actually in general, the majority of life, it's peasant-oriented, it's village-oriented. Most of these people don't go to school, most don't get an education. Most don't participate in the economy or the city life. The village is the extent of their contact. Their contact. And the thing is, another, ding against hearts and minds. We come in. We have to build our own infrastructure. We need places to sell goods. We need, things, things for Americans to buy, things for Americans to do. Our soldiers come in with a lot of money. We flood the economy with money, and we destroy the local economy. Okay? Why do people need to buy rice from the village when the Americans are bringing in better tasting food? Why do the local, village clothes makers, when, people can go buy stuff from the Americans? And you put so much money in the economy, right, then you get deflation. The individual money supply, it's not worth as much because there's more money in circulation. So what money the peasantry has now is not worth as much. And so what we're going to see is, by virtue of our being there, we push people into the hands of the Viet Cong. We push them into the hands of the North Vietnamese. So now we don't know if this woman is VC or civilian, but okay, strategic Hamlet, we've removed her from her village. A previous search and destroy killed her husband, and now we've destroyed her livelihood with her economy. We're creating the conditions for her to pick up that rifle and fight against us. All the while, our elected leaders, Johnson, Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara, General William Westmoreland, are all saying, no, our intent is to win her heart and her mind, while we are creating the conditions where she will oppose us, or at the very least, be sympathetic to those who do. This is the reality of the war in Vietnam. Or things like just the massive bombing campaign. Here on the left, an 81 Skyraider. Sorry, AH-1 here. I literally just used the Korean War designation. Sorry. The A-1 Skyraider. Coming in, dropping white phosphorus on a village. Why? American troops took fire there, so there must be VC there, so we're just going to raid the whole village. Here on the right, these are craters after a B-52 strike. Just look at the size of some of those craters. And we're bombing the hell out of South Vietnam. And this reshapes the life of the villager. It doesn't necessarily affect the soldier. He's used to this. He expects this. It doesn't affect us. But what are the people that live in that village? What about the people that live close to where that strike happened? What about the people who had that cleared farmland and now we've just destroyed their crops? The air raids cause a stupid amount of damage, and remember, we rely on them to fight it on the cheap. It's cheaper for us, or at the very least, we hope it's more politically expedient to bomb the hell out of the village than to draft another, 600,000 people. By 1966, 2 million South Vietnamese are displaced from their villages. 4 million by 1968. Not North, not communists, the people we're trying to win their hearts and minds. We've destroyed the villages of 4 million people by 1968. How the hell are we supposed to win their hearts and minds if we're blowing up where they live? Then the big one. Why do they crack? We're bombing them from the air. We're burning their villages. How many are killed as friendly fire in firefights? How many, are killed during raids like this? This is from the Army of the Republic of Vietnam raiding a South Vietnamese village. They're literally burning the village of somebody they're supposed to protect. The kid, look at the baby. The baby doesn't even have clothes. That's what we're doing. We don't have an exact number, but the best estimates that I can find are anywhere between, and this is the problem with peasant life, these people did not always have registered birth certificates or government documents, but anywhere between 400,000 and 2 million Vietnamese civilians are killed. the lion's share of which are in South Vietnam. And a fair amount dead at the hands of American weapons, one way or the other. When we think of Vietnam, okay, we think of the 50-some-odd thousand Americans killed. We think largely American-centric. What does it mean for us? But what I want you to think of is what it meant for them. 2 million civilians killed because we were adamant that communism could not spread. Up to 2 million killed because we said, okay, if we're going to fight that war in communism, we don't want to go all in because we want to pursue the Great Society, or we don't want to make the war unpopular. Up to 2 million killed because we don't want to fight the war quickly and decisively, fight the enemy in his country on his battlefield. 2 million. And I've read estimates upwards of another 1 million in terms of military personnel in North Vietnamese. This is a god-awful, bloody war. I mentioned this already, hurting the economy, but by 1967, in the midst of all this chaos, 1967, the majority of workers were supporting one side or the other. They're not making stuff in country. In addition, we want to try to make money off the war. And I'm not saying we're fighting the war to make money, but, if you can help pay for the war, that'd be great. So we bring in stuff for the Vietnamese to purchase. Our stuff is often cheaper and better quality. So eventually the economy and the industry crumbles. And again, we're doing this while we're trying to help the civilians. Now, we do give some aid, absolutely. The Agency for International Development, $500 million per year to give them a school program. We get people from all over the world to come in and, try to, let's provide education, provide housing. Let's try to bring Vietnam into the 20th century. You're going to get what are called political action teams to try to, get people to move beyond their traditional peasant life and to look at the world around them, to take part and have a vested interest in the government of South Vietnam, of course, with an anti-communist bent. Let's have the New Life Hamlet program. Let's not be as bad as Strategic Hamlet, but, we're going to create new villages. We're going to, get people to have a vested interest in the village. We're going to teach you new farming techniques. We're going to teach you how to provide for your self-defense. But we're going to give you World War II weapons because we don't want to risk you, turning against us. We're going to get the Civil Operations and Revolutionary Development Support, CORD, say that 5 times fast, which try to, the whole point of this, they want to try to cast the Vietnam War as a social revolution. This isn't the United States not wanting to keep communism out. This is South Vietnam wanting to reshape itself, remake itself, and enter the 20th century. Is that exactly what's going on? No, but that's the type of spin we want to put on it. But the thing is, by 68, all that civilian aid, all of that stuff towards pacification, what do I mean by that? Making sure South Vietnam does not go communist, comes under military control. You have propaganda like this, okay, which basically tries to tell villagers, work with the government of South Vietnam, or else the communists are going to kill you. The Viet Cong are always there. You're defenseless. Work with us. We'll help your village. We'll make it prosperous, and we will protect you. But remember, at the same time you're getting this from the Army of the Republic of Vietnam, you're also getting this from the Army of the Republic of Vietnam. So, again, hearts and minds, the problem is you have people saying one thing, but they're doing another. And obviously, that's not going to make civilians run to help you. And then we go and we just screw it all up. Again, we need to fight it on the cheap. And one of the issues is, okay, well, you can't defeat the Viet Cong because they can melt away into the forest. They can live off the villages. So we come up with the brilliant idea of mass deforestation. Agent Orange. We're going to spread this all over Vietnam. Put it in large forests to kill off the forest, wipe away where these people are retreating to. We're going to drop it around certain villages to kill crops, to starve out the Viet Cong. But the problem is, when you destroy the VC's crops, you also destroy the crops of that village that you would really like their hearts and minds. There's also the fact this causes major health defects. This is a two-headed baby born to a woman who was in contact with Agent Orange. This is common. Many people who were first-hand exposed, as well as people who were born to that, still have medical defects and medical problems and health issues to this day. In many cases, weeks, months, or wherever later, after Agent Orange had been dropped. Again, some 19 million gallons of the stuff. We're not just spritzing this around. 19 million gallons. We send in American troops. This stuff stays. And so they pick up health issues. And their kids pick up health issues. And today, the United States government, it is still our policy that says that Agent Orange was not that bad. And if you have health issues that can be traced to that, you will receive no money from the United States government. You have a war wound that left you disabled. You'll get paid by the United States government. My grandfather on a battleship in World War II went deaf. Why? Because being inside a steel box with 3 guns that fired, 1,400-pound shells makes you go deaf. The government paid him. American veterans suffering from Agent Orange poisoning, and I don't even know if you'd call it poisoning, do not, as of 2016, receive any compensation. In fact, the United States government, this is an actual Air Force poster, tapped into Smokey the Bear. Please, Smokey, only you can prevent a forest. We made it a game. As we dropped stuff that led to mass starvation, mass deforestation, and a crazy amount of birth defects. If you haven't, make sure you watch 2 Days in October. Again, the BBC name is Why America Lost the Vietnam War. What are the students protesting? They're protesting the use of napalm, which is probably the iconic weapon of Vietnam. A jelly gas that just bursts into this huge ball of flame. You get it on you and it'll just burn through. Submerge it in water, but you don't get it off. When you raise it out of water, it will reignite. This leads to massive burns and does not discriminate. Friend, foe, civilian, non-combatant. It kills all in its path. White phosphorus, long used to create smoke and for signaling, now it's been weaponized. It's called Willy Pete, and what happens if a bit of white phosphorus gets under your skin, it just keeps burning. You literally have to take a knife and cut it out to get it out of there, because it'll just keep burning and burning. The wounds are horrible. But white phosphorus isn't really designed to kill you, just maim you so much you are combat ineffective, that you can no longer pick up a rifle and shoot back, or no longer want to stay, or be just so maimed that, sorry, you cannot fight anymore. And again, why do we do these chemical weapons? Agent Orange and Operation Ranch Hand, napalm, white phosphorus, all this stuff, because we see them as force multipliers. We see them as, if we can use this stuff, we don't have to send as many troops. We don't have to send as much stuff. We also hope, by showing just the overwhelming amount of firepower we can bring to bear, the North Vietnamese will seek peace. But the problem is, you watch that on TV. and people start to get queasy. People start to get nervous. People start to say, how are we the good guys? And what this leads to is all of this, coupled with the war just not going anywhere. 1967 looks a lot like 1966, looks a lot like 1965. People start to eventually question, what the hell are we doing there? I apologize that I couldn't lecture about it, but Vietnam, it's one of those. I want to be as serious as possible because, again, if I won't go so far as to say fighting there was a mistake, I will definitely go as far as to say how we fought there, how we conduct ourselves it's a stain on American history. And I mean, we as a society know that. That's why today, when, the war in Iraq started to go nowhere, it was called Bush's Vietnam. The Soviet-Afghan War in the 80s, the Soviets' Vietnam. Vietnam carries with it this idea of a quagmire, a no-win, just this money pit. But it's so much more than that because it also reflects the problem when you fight a war but you don't have that major of an investment in it. Or when you want to do it on the cheap, it can often be far more disastrous than anybody ever intended. So I'm sorry I couldn't make any jokes. Which is weird. I can make jokes in my World War II class, apparently. But I will see what I can do for something a bit more lighthearted. If nothing else. You know what I'll do? I'll post a couple of videos about some LSD training done by the United States government and the British government. One's short, one's longer. But hopefully this should at least provide comic relief. Again, sorry I couldn't be more of a jokester. That's the one good thing about survey courses, because broad stuff, you don't really get into the nitty-gritty. You can make jokes. Here, it's awful damn hard to. So, that'll wrap it up for today. As always, I'll see you in the next video. I'm grading as fast as I can. Hopefully in a couple of days you should have your stuff back. So, if there's anything I can do, let me know. I'll see you in the next video. Bye-bye.